Today on the show, we talk marijuana. After a series of twists and turns, there is a new proposed ordinance to bring recreational cannabis production facilities and micro-businesses to the city of Detroit. As Michigan's largest city and a place where marijuana decriminalization passed on the ballot with a whopping 69% of the vote in 2018, residents, investors, and consumers are keeping an eye on what the Motor City does. To unpack it, Detroit City Council President Pro Tem James Tate joins me on the line. I'm Jer Stays, and welcome to your Daily Detroit for Wednesday, February 16th, 2022. Welcome back to the show, sir.
Thank you for having me. Really appreciate the opportunity.
Of course, and I appreciate you taking some time to kind of unpack what's been going on. So the last time we talked with you, there was a whole different idea around what we're going to do with the marijuana ordinances in Detroit. There was some legal issues in between time. Now you're up to bat again with some new ideas. I know that listeners and people are interested in the industry want to see, what's going to happen in the city of Detroit. So what's new, and why did you think it was important to give this another shot?
As I've mentioned, this has been a long time coming. We've worked on this ordinance, from the original iteration of almost 3 or 4 years now. And City Council back in November of 2020 approved for the first time, adult use licensing marijuana ordinance. And when the time for applications to be accepted by the city took place in April, about 2 days later, we received a lawsuit. And subsequently, 2 days after that, the judge, federal judge, then basically put an injunction and told us we could not accept any additional licenses. We had many conversations, the city did, with the plaintiff's attorney, couldn't come to a resolution. And the judge said, okay, since you guys can't come to a conclusion, a resolution, a solution, settlement, then I'm going to set a trial date for September of 2022. Now, he said this back in, I think it was like August, maybe, or somewhere around that time last year. So we're talking about a year after that. So we began working on the ordinance, a new ordinance, because it just doesn't make sense for us to hold out until September of this year, and where we still may end up losing a case based on the fact that it's before the same judge. And there's other elements at play as well that just really push us in a direction where we need to get on the ground and start moving more quickly than not. Took to heart the concerns that the court had. Not to say that I agree with them, but again, we got to make sure that we go through. If we're going through the same judge, we kind of have an understanding of where his thought process and how he would be interpreting the law. This ordinance is a little different. We keep the same spirit, and the spirit is ensuring to the best of our ability that we have equity applicants who have the opportunity to compete in this industry that has traditionally frozen out those individuals who live in municipalities that have been disproportionately impacted by cannabis arrests, one of which being the city of Detroit. And we knew that if we did nothing, we just flipped the switch on cannabis, then, we would find a situation that looks similar to our medical marijuana situation here in the city of Detroit, where, out of 75 licenses, literally one handful are actual Detroiters. And that is very challenging. So for us, it was imperative to move in a different direction that provided, that opportunity for equity applicants to be able to compete. And that's what we have here. We've got two different tracks of licensing, one for equity applicants as well as non-social equity applicants. And there's going to be 3 licensing phases. Each phase is going to have no less than 12 licenses available. And I'm strictly right now talking about the limited license of retail. Unlimited licenses that were unlimited in the previous ordinance, same thing. We have not limited them in this ordinance either. But these limited licenses, this retail license, we're going to have, as well as the other limited license, 3 phases of licensing. 12 and 12 for the first phase of licensing, 12 and 12 licenses available for the second phase, but 14 and 14 licenses available for the third phase. And when I'm giving those two numbers again identify the licenses that are available for equity applicants and the licenses that are available for non-equity applicants. And now what's different in this particular ordinance is that after those three phases of licensing, if a current medical marijuana provisioning center licensee and operator is not awarded a license within those three phases, 5 years later, in 2027, in January of 2027, those entities that did not receive licenses, adult use licenses, will be allowed to convert their medical marijuana licenses to adult use. But again, that entity would have to keep up the licensing with the state, keep up to date on all approvals that are necessary, and then also have to go through the subsequent approvals that are required for adult use retail establishments. But they will not have a competitive process at that point following the three phases in 2027, nor will they have to go through a lottery. So that is something that is very different in this ordinance. The legacy program in the past was a entryway, essentially, of eligibility for licensing. Again, looking at the judge's statements, it was clear that was going to be challenging for us. So we used, instead of instead of a legacy Detroiter being the qualifier, we now use social equity, the definition by the state on what a social equity applicant is. And believe we're a much stronger legal ground and have created an ordinance that is defensible. But that does not mean that we're not going to get sued. I mean, I've said this before. I believe somebody's drawing up a lawsuit right now to sue us. And that typically is the case whenever you have ordinances that really focus on social equity and not equality, but equity. And that's a real big difference. And so it's going to be a landmine that we're still going to have to walk. But I believe that we have dodged many of the concerns that led us down the pathway of our licensing being a restraining order being on our licensing for the last year or so. I think we've gotten past that. But again, stranger things have happened, and we're still up for the fight. But we're going to continue to keep moving forward in this direction until we can ensure to the best of our ability that equity applicants and legacy Detroiters have an opportunity to compete for these licenses in the city that they live in, Detroit.
Yeah, you're mentioning the legal work. It makes me think of the old David Letterman jingle. Oh no, we're gonna get sued.
Yeah. I just know it's going to happen. I mean, we've seen it across the board around the country. And when we were sued the first time around, it was not a surprise. What was, in fact, a surprise was that the judge came down with his orders in the way that he did. Because I mean, we literally scoured the country, and we know that we were on the fringe. We know we were on the edge. But the question is, why didn't he allow us to at least pursue the program and see how it operated before he stopped it? I still think that we would have, potentially ultimately won the case, but it's a gamble, and it's a gamble with other people's money right now that who've invested, thousands, millions, hundreds of thousands, and potentially millions of dollars into these businesses, and I owe it to them to do everything I can to make sure that investment is not one that's lost.
So, for the unfamiliar, what does that equity framework look like with the state?
Yeah, so the state, essentially they've said that their social equity program promotes and encourages participation in the marijuana industry by people from communities that have been disproportionately impacted by marijuana prohibition and enforcement. And, their focus is to positively impact those communities. Detroit licensing process, Detroit is one of those communities. And so that is the verbiage that is ripped directly from the state's requirements. Essentially, if you're a municipality that has a certain level of poverty as well as disproportionate arrests and convictions for cannabis, the state has then designated your municipality as one that is qualifying for social equity credits, if you will. And so what we did was, instead of us creating a different pathway, we adopted the state's language, and again, believe that gives us the ability to stand on a more firm legal ground to the point where we've had individuals from the industry who were, previously up in arms and completely against this ordinance. We've gotten, some, you're not going to get everyone, but who said, this is much better. They don't necessarily agree with it, but they believe that it is more fair to their, to them than the previous one was. But I'll say across the board, whether you talk about legacy Detroiters, social equity applicants, current operators, no one is 100% satisfied with everything in the ordinance. And I can say that no one's completely trashed it either. So I guess when you start looking at legislation, some would say that is good legislation when you have it that way. But if you're talking to someone who's not pleased, they certainly want another bite at the apple.
Well, it's the art of compromise. I wanted to ask, how under this draft would licenses be scored, or how would they be awarded?
Yeah, so there's 127 points total. They're going to be scored on, business plan, site control, your due diligence. Also, an element that is exclusive to us and not necessarily from the state, but one that talks about the good neighbor plan, and it really focuses on the investment that these operators are looking to make into the community where their businesses are located. And then we look at also the leadership within and participation in the Detroit businesses and organizations. That also is important. You got to show that you are a part of this community. Again, we're a community that's been disproportionately impacted by cannabis arrests. Well, now we need to ensure that these businesses, to the best of our ability, are also investing in our community and in our neighborhood. Then you have another section that deals with social equity. This industry was built on the backs of folks who were, arrested and incarcerated for cannabis. I don't know if you recall, but remember the 3 strikes law. There were some folks who were incarcerated for double-digit years after a $5 bag, dime bag worth of cannabis. And so now we're looking at the ability of current individuals who are seeking licenses who are not social equity applicants, looking for them to work with social equity applicants and provide them either with space or a joint venture in terms of equity. Got to find a way to balance this industry, and city government, we can't do it all. We're going to need all hands on deck, and that means those who are looking to participate in this industry are also going to have to assist us in helping to provide that to reach that goal. So those are the different sections. Again, business plan, site control, due diligence, your good neighbor plan, your community leadership, and then your social equity commitments as well.
So what's your hopeful timeline on pulling this all together and turning it into a thing where we can start to get moving on this?
Yeah, hopefully, I always say ASAP. One vote. We put it before the city council, and now it's going through the committee process. After it hits the committee process, completes the committee process, it'll go to the full body. The full body, I'm not sure when we're going to have an opportunity to review it. It may be about a month before it's approved, maybe shorter. Hopefully it'll be shorter. But what I will say is, in terms of when we can begin licensing, well, for those unlimited licenses, processors, growers, and others, you will have applicants will have an opportunity pretty much immediately to start submitting their applications. We already have licensing processes that will allow for those to take place ASAP. It's when we start talking about the limited licenses, the micro business, the designated consumption lounge, and of course the adult use retail establishments. Those may take about a month or so for us to get our processes up and running, make sure we kick the tires. Because, again, we talked about the fact that this is a very litigious industry, and, one mistake can, completely upend everything we're trying to do. So we want to do it the right way, do it the best way, do it the most fair way possible. So it'll probably be a month out after the after the ordinance is approved before we begin accepting licenses for the limited licenses. But don't have an exact timeline, but that gives us kind of a rough estimate of where things will be.
Okay. Is there any kind of guidance around, say, the placement of the lounges or the retail? Because I know that that's an issue for some Detroiters about, okay, so where are these going to be located?
Yeah, so we have not addressed any additional zoning issues. So what was in place prior last year, what we put in place, stays in place now. We were sued on the licensing ordinance, not the zoning ordinance. So that's in place. But I will say that I am working with my colleagues, and we'll be working more in earnest once we get past the licensing phase to address some of the concerns dealing with zoning. And I'm looking to reduce having a reduction in the zoning restriction of 1,000 feet for controlled uses to 750 feet. And your controlled uses are your establishment that essentially allow alcohol to be left from to leave the premises. Reality is we haven't seen any data that shows that removing or reducing that 1,000 feet to 750 feet will cause any negative impact. But what I have seen and had conversations with folks about was that maybe their business, their buildings that they currently own, free and clear, that they will be able to use in licensing is within 800 feet. And 200 feet is separating them from either keeping their building and utilizing it for their establishment, or potentially selling their building or having to sit on their building and purchasing a completely different one for multiple thousands of dollars, maybe more, on the fingers crossed promise maybe could be of a license. But there's no guarantee that they would actually get one. So making adjustments along the way, that's what we told everyone. Not so pig-headed where we just don't want to hear it, and this is the only way that we can provide equity and fairness within the licensing ordinance. Looking to get that feedback from everyone, but this is the baseline where we stand, and we're going to continue to focus on social equity and equity applicants to the best of our ability. Won't see everyone pleased on it, but the intent and the desire has been presented time and time again, and I hope people appreciate the amount of work that's gone into not just this ordinance, this version of the ordinance, but where we started all the way back, even with the medical marijuana licensing back in 2015.
Well, I know people are very interested in the topic. City Council President Pro Tem James Tate, thank you for your time on Daily Detroit. Until next time.
I appreciate it, and I certainly look forward to the invite. I'll be right back.
Before I let you go, if you value detailed coverage like this on what's happening in our city and region, consider leaving a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you download your favorite shows. I'm Jer Stays. Thanks for listening. Take care of each other, and I'll see you around Detroit.